All right, Desiree, another group of foreign nationals fleeing the violent attacks in Gauteng is leaving South Africa. Almost 100 Zimbabwean nationals who've been living in community halls in Katlehong in Ekurhuleni are being repatriated to their country of origin. Earlier, about 153 Mozambican nationals also left in 3 buses from a hall also in Katlehong. Let's get the very latest. Now, Gillian Pillay is a reporter on the ground. Gillian, a very good morning to you. What are you witnessing this morning?
Very good morning to you, Blaine. We are at one of these community halls that have been home to something like over 150 Mozambican nationals since last Thursday. And we've seen humanitarian aid really pitching in, assisting them with food. But most importantly, they have decided that the 150 have decided that they rather want to go home, that they don't feel safe and they don't feel comfortable with returning to their homes here on the East Rand, here in Johannesburg, here on Gauteng's East Rand. So behind us, as you can see, a lot of them are now in these buses. A lot of the documents have been processed when we arrived here. We haven't been able to talk to them. Naturally, also, you know, it's a mixed sense of emotions that you do pick up, having to pack up their bags, having to pack up their belongings. There's quite a few women and children also in this group, now having to go back to a country that they left for reasons around political instability, economic instability, hoping that South Africa would be the place where they could call home, where they could be safe, where they could find the asylum that they'd hoped for. But those lootings now again rearing its head last week. These are very similar scenes to what we saw playing out in 2008, Blaine, where we saw quite a lot of foreign nationals returning home, not just to Mozambique, but to different parts of the African continent. And then I think after that had died down, they really gave the country a second chance and then possibly returned. But now again, heading home. I'm joined by the Consular General, Mr. Tamele, who has been working with a lot of the people that we see in these buses now having to opt home. Just give us a sense of what has it been like? We know that they've been housed in this community hall and they now are opting to go home.
Well, yes, they have opted to go home. We have been assisting them since Wednesday last week. Unfortunately, we had to prepare the papers. That's why they could not leave earlier. We issued them with certificates of repatriation. We worked with the Department of Home Affairs, which issued them with exit permits. And the 153, which were in this community hall since Wednesday. Of those 153, 97 are men. We have 35 women and 63 children. So they're ready to go. I think all the logistics is in place and they will be leaving shortly.
So what happens from this point onwards? You've assisted them at this leg. They now travel, they make a 5 to 6 hour bus trip to the border. What happens from then onwards?
What happens that there will be officials at the Mozambican side of the border waiting for them. And from there, they will be taken to a transit point where they are going to be screened in terms of who comes from where. And then from there, they will be taken to their various destinations with the support, of course, of the government, because they don't have the means. They've lost all their belongings. They lost their shelter. They don't have the means to continue staying. So they will be taken to their various destinations once they are on the other side.
What have they been saying to you guys as you've been busy processing them around, them not wanting to return to the homes here in Johannesburg, in the surrounding areas of Gauteng?
They don't feel safe. They are scared because they think that maybe they can be physically attacked or something might happen. So they are not safe. They don't feel safe to go back to where they were living.
Just talk to us quickly before we wrap up about the kind of humanitarian aid that you've been providing and for how long. We see the Red Cross is here. We also know the UN migrant agencies here. We know that they've been housed in this hall. We see sanitary pads being provided and other essentials.
No, we thank those who have provided assistance. The gift of the givers gave us a lot of support, as well as some churches and some other humanitarian organizations. So we didn't have problems or feeding the people who were here, and we're thankful for that. Yeah.
So your message to the group before they take off, what will that be?
It's always good to go home. Of course, they came here looking for better life, but if they cannot stay here, of course, they are welcomed back home, and we've spoken to them. And we've said, well, there are also chances at home and they have to exploit them.
That was the Consulate General, Mr. Tamele, talking to us about the kinds of processes underway ahead of these buses, these 3 buses heading off to the border. We know that at another community hall, Blaine, there's another group of Zimbabwean nationals that are also expected to get into buses and to also make their way to the border. We also know that yesterday quite a few, over something like 300 Nigerian nationals were sponsored a flight by a private sponsor, and they, in the end, after a lot of logistical challenges around documentation, they eventually boarded that flight, and then they made their way home. But this is, you know, it's not nice to be here to get that sense of displacement, you know, having to return home under the conditions that these foreign nationals now have to. As the Consulate General said there, you know, they came here for a better life, and this is now, you know, they prefer going home rather than risking their safety and their lives, not knowing if these lootings and these attacks will ignite again, Blaine.
From what you gather from the Consul General there is that there's this climate of fear as well as confusion. Jill, where were they staying here in South Africa?
From my understanding, a lot of churches pitched in, but where I'm standing now, right just to my left, there's a community hall, and I'm sure that, like we've seen in the past, this particular community hall was home to these over 150 men, women and children, and this is where their meals were provided. This is where, you know, they just sought refuge as these lootings were continuing in the CBD, but also in Tembisa, and this has basically been their last journey for them before they actually make their way home on this, what could be, you know, bus trips are never easy, but it's a 5 to 6 hour, possibly grueling trip, and now having to, when they do get to the border, there'll be other officials on that side that will also receive them. But this community hall here is just one of several that have been home to foreign nationals affected and displaced by what we've seen play out in the streets of Gauteng, but also in the streets of the CBD, Blaine. But it's a very different atmosphere here. I'm sure some of them are happy to go home, but what are they going home to? Because this is why they came into the country, for that better life. And you know, to go home and with very little, basically some just managing to get the clothes that they could get together. But I guess the most important and the priceless thing here is that they are alive, and they're going back with their children, they're going back with loved ones, and they're going back home where they feel it's a dire situation at home, but it's a safer situation from what we can sense from what the Consulate General has said to us.
So no doubt the future is uncertain, but prior to being moved to that community hall, Gillian, were they in or staying in an informal settlement?
From my understanding, Blaine, and I'm going to move out of the picture now, from my understanding, a lot of these migrant workers do come from informal settlements. You know, some of them around Tembisa, around Gauteng's East Rand, just working so that they could send a lot of the little bit of money, that they are making through domestic work or any other piecework sending that money home because of the situation back home, that family members rely on them to sustain the others back home. But a lot of them naturally living in informal settlements, those informal settlements having been torched, having been destroyed in some of these attacks. We heard what the Consular General had said there, that many having very little now, having grabbed the little bit that they could and putting that in bags and getting onto a bus and opting to go home, Blaine.
Jill, appreciate you reporting. Thank you very much indeed. Gillian Pillay coming to us live from Katlehong.